Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Horizonte Minerals PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged. They can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so, and these will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard. Before we begin, if I may, I would like to submit the following poll, and if you could give that your kind attention, I'm sure the company would be most grateful. And I'd now like to hand you over to CEO Jeremy Martin. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Good to be here again. So today we're going to be giving you an update on our activities on site for the first quarter of this year. But I think before we do that, it's worth just recapping the Horizonte story for any new listeners that we've got as part of this update today. So our focus is to become a scalable, low-cost nickel producer. We're focused in Brazil. We've got two tier 1 assets that we own 100% of. The Araguaia ferronickel project, which is under construction, and you'll get updates on today. The second asset is the Vermelho nickel cobalt asset, which is going through a feasibility study. And between Vermelho and Araguaia, we've got the resource base to build out around 60,000 tons of annual nickel production, which is our short to mid-term objective as we move towards those production targets. All of our assets are low quartile, high grade, and demonstrate robust economics. They've got good sustainability characteristics, and you'll see some of the stats around both projects. And we've got an experienced management team as we move through to first commercial production in Araguaia. So that's our business model. We're located in northeastern Brazil. We're in a mining region. We're in the Carajás mining region, which is where there are a number of large iron ore copper operations. And you can see here on the map, Araguaia South, where we're currently building out the Araguaia ferronickel plant. Araguaia North, where we've got a cluster of high-grade deposits. And then over to the northwest, we've got the Vermelho nickel cobalt project. And what's key here is all of these deposit centres are within trucking distance of each other. We've got very good infrastructure. We've got roads, rail, hydroelectric power, and access to port, all of which allow the low-cost development that we're building out. This slide shows our production profile over time, and you can see we are currently building out Araguaia Line 1, which will generate just under 15,000 tons of annual nickel. We then bring in Line 2, and you can see there that will take us up to around 29,000 tons of annual nickel production. And then when Vermelho comes online, at full capacity, the target is over 60,000 tons of nickel, and you can see where that places us globally outside of the kind of Indonesian and Chinese nickel producers. So it will be a significant pipeline that we're developing here, sitting up alongside some of those major producers you can see there on the left of the scale. In terms of valuation, we're currently trading at 0.4 times PNAV today. And as we move through the course of this year and into next year and move towards full commercial production, we see that valuation going up, and we should be trading up with some of those producing peers at somewhere around 0.9 to over 1 times PNAV. So significant value to be created as we go through the next 12 to 24 months. Moving on to the Araguaia project itself, which obviously is the focus of this presentation. Worth just refreshing on what this flow sheet and what the project looks like. On the slide in front of you, you can see the Araguaia plant. It's a very traditional RKEF process. All of the items on that flow sheet would be the same that you would see in the 30 or 40 operations that are producing ferronickel today globally. We have designed this operation so you can scale production. As we talked about, we're currently building line 1, but all of the plant, the power, the layout design has all been optimized for that second line, which we've currently got a feasibility study running on. We're going to be producing high-grade ferronickel, around 28 to 30% nickel in product, low impurity, There is no tailings with this process. You produce a silica byproduct, which can be used in downstream product. And all of the mining is shallow. The maximum depth of the pits is 25 to 30 meters. These are the economics from our pre-feasibility study. The economics from line 1 are shown in light blue. Again, at today's nickel price, you can see some pretty compelling economics there. 2-year payback, somewhere around 40 plus % IRR, and over $1.5 billion NPV. And a key driver is the low C1 cash cost there of sub $7,000 a ton, which will put you in the lower quartile globally. And then when you bring the second line on there, you can see that adds effectively $1 billion to the NPV and takes us from around 14,500 tons of annual production up to 29,000 tons. And that will generate at both line 1 and line 2, that'll generate sort of over $400 million of free cash flow, so highly cash generative. From a sustainability and environmental point of view, that's also a big part of our story here. We've got a number of international lenders, and we work to some of the highest standards, IFC equator principles. From an environmental point of view, we will recycle around 90% of our water. We've got very strong credentials around our GHG reporting, and we'll have some of the lowest CO2 per ton of nickel in any new operation in the ferronickel market. In terms of what we do for the people and our communities, there's going to be significant employment, over 30% in the Para state, and we're also driving for significant female participation in our workforce. And in terms of stakeholder delivery and engagement, the actual asset itself will deliver around $700 million of taxes and direct employment over the 28-year mine life. So it's going to be a multi-generational social and economic driver in this part of the region. So if we look at what we've achieved in the quarter to date, obviously significant activity on site. Where we sit today, we're around 50% complete. In the last quarter, the mining services contract has been awarded to a leading Brazilian miner, Fagundes. We've closed the second tranche of the debt financing. We awarded the contracts for the Line 2 feasibility study. And crucially, we've got 0 LTIs over 2 million hours worked, which is a major milestone and achievement. And on top of that, we obviously had a number of long lead items delivered to site, and you'll see the site progress over the next few slides. So this slide just shows the overall plant site, sort of looking out across the key areas. It's approximately sort of 800 meters east to west by sort of 500 to 600 meters wide. It's a relatively large plant site. In the sort of lower left area, you can see the electric arc furnace surrounded by the blue steel work for the building. And then the sort of core of the flow sheet runs through the middle of that slide. Looking at each of the areas in detail, this is the furnace facility. The large 18-meter diameter rotary kiln is in the center of that blue steelwork. It's actually covered in tarpaulins to allow the internal welding to be completed. You're currently seeing 3 levels of that building. It will, in final form, be 5 levels. And that building supports all of the associated equipment and infrastructure required to operate that arc furnace. So all of the cooling systems, the transformers, the slag and metal tackling equipment, and then also moving out to the left-hand side of that area, you've also got the calcine transfer system that takes the hot calcine from the rotary kiln and then loads it into the electric arc furnace. So you can see the modular construction where we've been lifting large sections of steelwork with scaffold railings already pre-assembled into place, and you can see some of the heavy lift equipment around the furnace. So major developments over the last quarter. Here we're looking at the 4 rotary kiln support columns. These are 6 meters high, and these will support the FLS supplied rotary kiln, which is 110 meters long. a lot of those kilns are now, those pillars are now complete. You can see some of the formwork where the top slab is being cast, and then that will support the main bearings and ring drive gear for the rotary kiln. And all of those have been completed in Q1 this year. This photo shows the rotary kiln. It's actually obviously arrived in Brazil, and it's now being transshipped and is being barged down the Araguaia River. And that will arrive on site early May, and then it will go through a fairly complex pre-assembly process where each of those kiln rings is welded together. It's then lifted up onto those columns that we've just seen on the previous slide. It's supported by cranes in the air, and then all of the sections are aligned and final welded. And then obviously it goes through its calibration tests to conform that obviously it's within the standards required, and that will be a very interesting piece of work to see that build out, and we should better show some live activity on movies as we build through that process. We're now looking at the homogenization building. This is a covered blending area where we build two stockpiles to feed into the rotary kiln. One will be at the front, one will be at the rear of that building, and every time you are reclaiming a pile, you're then building a new covered pile. And the idea here is this homogenization building blends the piles and ensure that you've got a very good mix of material to feed into that rotary kiln. Here you can see all the foundations, which are now complete, and you can see the steel work starting to be erected on those foundations for the main building itself. Primary and secondary crushing facilities. This is the steel work for the secondary crusher, and then on top of that will be placed the Metso Autotech secondary sizer, and you can see again the kind of site conditions and an overall layout on site from these images. And as we open with, we've also awarded the contract mining services contract to Fagundes, and it's a 5-year contract. Fagundes is one of the leading contract miners in Brazil. We've got equipment being mobilized on site, and actually pre-stripping of waste has already commenced. And then we'll start ore stockpiling as we move into Q3, allowing us to build up 6 months of ore ahead of pre-commissioning later in the year, early next year. Another key piece of the overall site is the 220 kilometer long power line, 124 kilometer long power line, which obviously we are responsible for construction. You can see here some of the main towers being erected. To date, we've completed 152 pylons out of a total of 260. So we're tracking schedule on the power line. And I think obviously the aim is that the power line will be complete as we move into Q3 next year ahead of this year ahead of full commercial ramp up next year. This shows some of the furnace ancillary equipment. These are actually the calcine feed bins, which have been fabricated in Korea. They are currently being shipped to site. We have a QA/QC agent in all of our fabrication facilities worldwide, which means that all of the equipment packages are inspected and approved before they're actually shipped to site. So this shows the schedule where we currently sit. Obviously, you can see all of the areas that have been completed in green. Those kind of key milestones. Obviously, this year in Q1, it's been the EM contract. We've seen obviously the detailed work around the furnace. Balance of procurement and long lead items awarded, completion of detailed engineering, civil works well advanced, the main 230 kVA and associated substations well advanced, and then as we move into Q2, Q3 and Q4, you can see other milestones as we move through that EM erection process, completion of the power line, water cooling dam and pipeline, and then moving through to energizing power line, and then that sort of cold commissioning later in the year ahead of first metal early next year. So a lot of work ahead of us, but obviously a significant amount of work completed to date. I think other areas that have also been advanced is obviously on the environment. We have got all of our key permits in place, and as we move through the second half of the year, it'll be obtaining our operational licenses for that ramp up. There's also been work around ongoing monitoring and ensuring we're in compliance with all our obligations. Social programs running around the site in terms of resettlement, and also the programs that we've got running with our local communities and in and around the town of Conceição with our supply partners have also been advanced as we move through into the second quarter of the year. So I think moving on to our second asset, which is the Vermelho nickel cobalt project. This again is a tier 1 asset. It's a long life, scalable, low cost operation. We're aiming to be producing 24,000 tons of nickel and around 1,200 tons of cobalt. The infrastructure around Vermelho is extremely good. We've got power, water, tarred highways, and we see this as obviously operation number 2 coming on stream behind Araguaia. Economics, again, as a refresher from the pre-feasibility study, this is an altogether larger development project than Araguaia. But if you look at the key economic drivers at today's nickel price, over the life of mine, it generates around $12 billion of free cash flow, short payback period, and again, a low C1 cash cost, putting you in the lower quartile. So it's an exciting development opportunity. Work on the feasibility study in Q1 has been around data collection on the ground. So that's been completion of first phase on the bulk sample pilot collection. That's material that's being sent to Perth in Australia for piloting to generate new samples of MHP for marketing purposes, and also to develop details around the process flow sheet from characterization samples. We've also close to completing all the geotechnical drilling around the plant site and in the pit for the design of the open pits. And there's also been significant work around environmental data collection, looking at the hydrogeology, looking at water requirements, looking at monitoring for dust, air, and all of those work streams flow into the EIA that we submitted late last year. So really, it's been an extremely active first quarter of the year, with the key milestones achieved on Araguaia and taking us to that 50% complete stage. We've obviously also advanced the feasibility study on Vermelho, and the work on the Line 2 feasibility study for Araguaia is also progressing well. That's currently focused on engineering of the flow sheet, and we'll be going out and obviously obtaining market pricing for that in the second quarter. We are really offering a fairly unique investment opportunity with Horizonte. We've got the portfolio of 100% owned tier 1 assets in an existing mining jurisdiction with good infrastructure. Araguaia is funded through to first metal to take us obviously to that 14,500 tons of nickel with Line 2 doubling that. Between Vermelho and Araguaia, we've got that mid-term target of building out 60,000 tons of annual production, which will be low CO2 per ton of nickel with good ESG credentials. And we're able to also look at building out our resource base. We've got a number of targets in the district, and we are really positioned for a significant re-rate as we move through to first metal at Araguaia. And I think the other thing we're starting to see is there is a scarcity of these types of asset bases in the market. We've started to see M&A activity picking up across the base metal space, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that develops over the second half of the year. We've got a strong group of supportive shareholders led by La Mancha, with 23% of the business today, Glencore sitting at 17%, Orion at 10%, and then a number of institutions sort of running from 9% down to, you can see there, Condor, Asvalor at around 3%. So look, it's an exciting time for the business. The nickel market for the midterm is looking robust, and we will be moving through to that re-rate position as we deliver first metal out of Araguaia next year. So thank you very much, and I'd like to open for any questions.
Jeremy, Simon, thank you very much indeed for your presentation this afternoon. If I may, I will just bring back up your camera there. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab that's situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the team take a few moments to review those questions that were submitted already, I would like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. Simon, Jeremy, as you can see, we did receive a number of pre-submitted questions ahead of today's event and a number of questions that have come in throughout your presentation this afternoon as well. So firstly, thank you to all of those on the call for taking the time to submit their questions. And Jeremy, Simon, perhaps if I may hand back to you just to respond to those questions where it's appropriate to do so, and then I'll pick up from you at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks very much. So as you say, we've got a raft of questions here. So between us, we'll work through them. So the first question I can see here is how long is it expected to take to produce first nickel and reach nameplate at Araguaia? So we've modelled from first metal to full nameplate a 12-month ramp-up period, which is fairly normal for an operation of this size. Obviously, it can be done quicker, and it has been done quicker. But we feel that the 12 months is a realistic time frame to have in for that full ramp up. The second question here, is there likelihood to be another fundraise before Araguaia starts to produce ferronickel and becomes self-financing? Look, as we've outlined before, we've got funds in place to complete construction and ramp up. However, if there are any untoward events that are outside of our control, let's say a weather event, a geopolitical event, which pushes that schedule beyond what we've modelled, obviously then the funding position becomes more challenging. But as we sit to date, we've got full financing to go through to first metal and through ramp up. The next question is, when is the rotary kiln expected to arrive on site? As you may have seen, there are some photos. It's currently on its way down the Araguaia River, and it's due to arrive on site in the first week of May. And then obviously the construction process starts on site before it's lifted onto those kiln piers. Another question, are we on track for delivery of the remaining long lead items? Yes, we are. All key long lead items are being tracked. And to date, none of those items sit on the critical path. If they do fall onto the critical path, obviously we look at ways of realigning where they sit in the schedule and coming up with alternate solutions to any of those items. This is an interesting one. When was the CEO last at site himself? I'm actually down there pretty much every 4 weeks at the moment. So typically down on site on a monthly basis. And Simon, you're down on site every
every 6 weeks.
Yeah, 6 weeks.
So we were last down just before Easter.
Here we've got a question about Vermelho, which says Vermelho is still in the process of investigation, but obviously the cost of getting this into mine would be as large as the current mine build at Araguaia. As it's more suited to battery grade nickel, have you potential interest from any third parties? I think, look, we have had interest from a number of players in the battery space and also strategics. Obviously, we are advancing the project through to full feasibility. I think our view has been it's a major de-risking step completing the feasibility study, and at that point would be in a position to outline funding strategies going forwards, either 100% Horizonte financed or with a partner. So at this stage, the answer is yes, there has been interest, but obviously we're focused on completing the feasibility study. This question relates to the operating license. And the question is, the applications have been submitted. Is there a possibility that they won't be awarded? Look, the process to obtain the operating licenses is a very vanilla, well understood process in Brazil. Providing you're in compliance with all of your other obligations and licenses, there is a very low risk that those licenses won't be operated, won't be awarded. And also there are interim measures that allow you to start operating if those licenses haven't been awarded for whatever reason. So we don't see that as a material risk. Moving on here, perhaps Simon, you want to answer this one?
Yeah, is the rapid expansion of HPAL in Indonesia a risk or an opportunity for Vermelho? I.e., are there developments in how to build an HPAL that can be used in the Vermelho mine design to de-risk it? And will our ESG be important versus Indonesian HPAL? I think the expansion of HPAL generally is a good thing. It's now more mainstream than it used to be, and there have been successfully ramped up HPAL operations in Indonesia that have come in at a very compelling capex number and in a very short ramp-up period. So that as a whole is very good for the industry. It means that more people are looking at it and are willing to invest in HPAL, and there's more certainty it'll be successful. On the ESG front, I think Indonesia has some question marks over its ESG credentials, and I think with the expansion of ESG and importance in boardrooms, I don't think you're going to see all investment go into Indonesia, and people are going to look more favourably on higher ESG credentialed operations outside of Indonesia, which don't have the tailings, environmental deforestation, as well as burning coal for primary power generation associated with them. And in that regard, Brazil is placed very well globally. So we're pretty pleased with the jurisdiction that we're in from an ESG point of view.
Next question. The original line 2 delivery was for H2 23. Is this still on track? And how soon after line 1 is operational can construction on line 2 begin? So short answer is yes, the feasibility on line 2 is still on track for delivery in H2 23. We obviously have a number of debt covenants in place around line 1. So until line 1 is complete and ramped up, it's unlikely that we will actually start physical construction on line 2. But as soon as we're through that ramp up into nameplate, we will be ready to push the construction go ahead subject to financing on line 2. So it's something clearly that we're focused on and we'll want to move forwards as soon as we can. Have you got an offtake partner lined up for first production? Simon, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, the answer is for Araguaia, yes, we have a Glencore offtake that has been in place since we closed the project financing. We don't have an offtake in place for the second line or for Vermelho.
Next question, how many potential production lines at Vermelho and how large could this project potentially be? So it's currently designed as a staged 2-line operation, similar in the kind of concept at Araguaia. So we build train 1 at Vermelho, ramp that up, and then we build train 2, which gives us the 24,000 tonnes of nickel a year. That at the moment, you can support a plus 25-year, maybe 30-year mine life. When this was being developed by Vale, they were actually going to produce 42,000 tonnes or 46,000 tonnes of nickel a year for a 25 to 30-year mine life. So effectively, that gives you a feel for the overall scale that Vermelho could be built out at. Obviously, from our point of view, it's about managing capital and managing risk. Another question here, are you planning to produce a nickel matte product? What we've said on line 2 at Araguaia is yes, we're going to look at the potential to produce a portion of the product into the nickel matte arena. Obviously, that we'll do a trade-off on the economics between ferronickel and matte. At the moment, matte's getting a slight premium to ferronickel in the market, but things move very quickly there. But yes, the idea is to be able to have the ability to produce matte, which can then go straight into the battery chemistry market. Another question here around key equipment packages, and are there any pieces of kit that you're concerned that may not be in place when you want to ramp up line 1? As I said, all key equipment packages are scheduled for delivery to site within the current schedule and don't sit on the critical path. Obviously, if things do move on any key packages, we realign the schedule or come up with solutions to anything that could sit outside or on the critical path. We've already answered that one. Why, in your opinion, are we valued so low with such low volume? I think, look, we've done a lot of work looking at where we sit in relation to our peer group, and we're trading at around 0.4 times PNAV today on Araguaia.
Yeah, on stage 1 alone.
And that is very typical at that sort of valuation range for construction stage companies. So I think, look, this has been a long build. It's a 24-month build followed by a 12-month ramp up. I think our next valuation catalyst will be completion as we move through into Q1 next year. So that's where we see a valuation driver, and then obviously completion of ramp up 12 months later. So if you look at our base metals peer group of producers, it's a relatively small peer group, but many of those producing base metals companies are trading at sort of 0.9 to maybe 1.2, 1.4 times PNAV. So that's where we see the valuation going over the next 12 to 24 months. A question here, do Vale have an ongoing financial interest in Vermelho? No, they don't, but they have a royalty on the first 10,000 tons of nickel produced from Vermelho for the first 10 years. It's a low royalty. That's the only outstanding link that we have to Vale. Can you give any information on Araguaia North? Yes, look, one of the deposits in Araguaia North, Vale de Sonhos, forms part of the overall mine schedule for Araguaia. But as we're looking at the second line on Araguaia and also potentially a third line at Araguaia, that's where the other cluster of deposits in Araguaia North do come into play. So Serra da Tapa, Pau Preto, these really allow us to look at what 3 lines at Araguaia can generate and what the mine life is. Here we've got a question. In your presentation, you include both Araguaia and Vermelho. Is it still your belief that going it alone on both projects isn't possible? I would swing that around and say, actually, we believe that it is possible to build out both Araguaia and Vermelho. I think, look, if we successfully deliver Araguaia, talking about those PNAVs, we should be a sort of $1 to $1.5 billion market cap company. Obviously, look, we've shown we can raise close to $700 million for Araguaia. Those funding partners and debt providers are all extremely interested in additional follow-on financing potential within the business, which would run across into Vermelho. So I think we have the ability to build not only line 2, but also the potential to self-build Vermelho. But equally, as I alluded to earlier, we do have partner interest on Vermelho, and there may be a lower cost of capital and a faster track to develop Vermelho by bringing a partner in there. But what I would say is today we've got the ability to do either or option, and we will clearly be exploring both. I think this one for you, Simon.
CapEx raising decision, Vermelho versus phase 2 at Araguaia, which has priority? I think that's probably we would prioritize Araguaia line 2 on the basis that the time to execute is significantly shorter than Vermelho. We're still doing the feasibility study for Vermelho, which is due Q1 24. There'll then be a financing process and a construction start, whereas we could actually pull the trigger on Araguaia in advance of that. And I think the financing would be slightly quicker and smoother on the back of the banks already into a project financing in Araguaia.
Yeah, and that's the natural sequence. Araguaia line 1, Araguaia line 2, and then Vermelho. So that's the natural flow of development timing. I think that is all of the key questions that I can see. If there's anything else out there question-wise, we'd be happy to answer those in email format post the presentation. But I think that brings the session to an end. And any final wrap-up?
Jeremy, Simon, that's great. And thank you very much indeed for being so generous of your time there and addressing all of those questions that came in from investors this afternoon. And of course, if there are any further questions that do come through, we'll make these available to you immediately after the presentation has ended, just for you to review, to then add any additional responses, of course, where it's appropriate to do so. And we'll publish all those responses out on the Investor Meet Company platform. But Jeremy, if I may, just before really looking to redirect those on the call to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to yourself and the company, just ask you for a few closing comments to wrap up with. That would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much. So obviously, where we sit today, towards the end of April, we're around 50% complete on Araguaia, which is a key milestone. We're on schedule to complete the balance of build and produce first metal in early 24. The nickel market is looking robust for the mid to long term in terms of the product range that we're going to be producing. Obviously, we've got that scalable production profile with line 1, line 2, and Vermelho. And we think this really is a fairly unique investment offering in terms of being able to build out potentially 60,000 tons of nickel a year, all 100% owned in a mining jurisdiction such as Brazil with good ESG credentials. So it's an exciting time for the business, and we look forward to keeping you all updated. Many thanks.
Jeremy, that's great. And Simon as well, thank you very much indeed for updating investors this afternoon. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of HORIZONTE Minerals PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, so good afternoon to you all.